The U.S. military presence in South Korea is a long story, associated with political and strategic history, since the Korean War until now. So now, how many U.S. troops are stationed in South Korea? Let's go back into the details. Why are American soldiers stationed here? And at SAO, there's no sign that they're going to pull back. How do Koreans react to this? The history of American troops in North Korea is a story. It started after World War II. And it continues to this day. After Japan lost World War II, they had to withdraw from North Korea. But instead the Korean Peninsula was divided in two. The north was controlled by the Soviet Union. The south is run by the United States. Since then, the two sides have split. Support your allies. The United States began to station troops in the south to help build a new government against the wide land from the north. 1950 The Korean War broke out when the North, by Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, led the attack on the south, with the ambition of uniting the peninsula. Under the communist regime, the U.S. immediately joined in, leading the United Nations force to support the South. In this war, American soldiers went directly to war, sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tank planes to help the South fight back against the North. One of the most famous battles was the landing in Trial in 1950, where the U.S. and South Korea suddenly attacked behind the North Korean army, turned the tide of war. And finally to 1953. The two sides signed an armistice agreement ending the fighting. But there's no peace treaty. That's legally speaking. The North and the South, North Korea and South Korea, still in a state of war. Right after the Korean War, American presence in South Korea, supported by most of the people and the government, because they see America as a shield. Protect yourself from the North Korean threat. South Korea was poor at the time. There is no strong army. They need the help of the United States to ensure their security. So the United States and South Korea signed a mutual defense treaty. The U.S. has pledged to defend South Korea if attacked, especially from the north. Since then, U.S. troops remain in South Korea to defend the country. The number of American soldiers was very large, up to hundreds of thousands of people. The war is over. During the Cold War, North Korea is constantly the provocative actions, such as sporadic attacks in the demilitarized zone between the two. They even attempted to assassinate South Korean leaders. The U.S. has to keep its forces here to be ready to respond to any attack from the north like 1990. The situation is tense. When North Korea started developing weapons, nuclear and missiles. That's why American soldiers have to step up their operations. Patrol exercises with South Korea to be ready to deal with. It's also worrying the whole world. That's why South Korean soldiers are not just defending South Korea, but also to prevent development of the nuclear program from North Korea. So specifically the South Korean American forces. How many people are there now? And what they're doing? The U.S. currently has about 28,500 troops, are stationed in South Korea, mainly in large military bases, which is typically the Freeham base. It's the largest base not just in South Korea. It's also the largest military base outside the United States. Located only 65 kilometers south of Seoul, this base is larger than a small city, with full modern facilities from the hospital, school, shopping district up to the airport. When it comes to forces in South Korea, there's the 8th Army. This is the 6 main U.S. forces in South Korea. About 20,000 soldiers. Their mission? It's to protect South Korea from attacks from the north. This army has heavy weapons, like a tank, self-propelled artillery, high maneuverable jet. The U.S. Air Force in South Korea is extremely strong, with the fighter jets. It belongs to the most modern type. These planes patrol regularly, ready to deal with any situation that comes up. From North Korea, they're stationed at the Oregon base. It's one of the main American bases here. The 7th Fleet is the U.S. Navy, regularly patrol the waters around South Korea. There is no permanent naval base. 6 or the Air Force. But they're willing to deploy aircraft carriers, ships and submarines to assist if there are. Many will wonder. The war ended a long time ago. The U.S. did not withdraw its troops. Just try to be stationed for something. Because the U.S. wants to counter the threat from North Korea. North Korea doesn't just have an extremely powerful military. Eastern Islands, with about a comma of 2 million standing troops. They also have nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. That makes the neighbors. America has a headache. Especially America's allies. including South Korea and Japan. The presence of American forces. It's seen as an important shield to stop North Korea from attacking South Korea. American soldiers don't just play a protective role, it also has a strong deterrent effect on North Korea. And I also have to say that's the political situation in this area. Northeast Asia region. It's where the power of many great powers comes together. Like China, Russia and Japan. With work, China is expanding its power in the South China Sea and the neighborhood. The US presence in South Korea is also a way to keep the balance of power. Don't let China stand alone. The US and South Korea are not only military allies. We're also strategic partners in many areas. This alliance helps South Korea grow. Strong, stable economy. And America. It has its place in the Northeast. American troops are here. So, large exercises also take place. Quite often. The United States regularly holds joint military exercises to maintain combat readiness and defensive capabilities. The top priority has always been the threat from North Korea. There are big exercises in there. For example, Aljebidensu is also known as US. This is the biggest defense exercise of the US and South Korea. Happens every year. Special attention should be paid to the word defense. This exercise, the description of total war situations. Test your defensive abilities against sudden attacks from North Korea. This exercise. This includes activities at sea, in the air and on land. With participation. A combined force of 10,000 soldiers from both sides. Total war situation simulation. From naval attacks to counterattacks on the ground. You can see through it. The American military. In Korea, it is only good for Korea. Is it like that? First, the presence of American forces. Bring in economic benefit to South Korea. Especially in areas near military bases. These facilities. It's not just about providing jobs for locals. It also increases demand in the region. From food service to housing. It's a small six. There is also a lot of debate about cost. Maintain the presence of US military. South Korea now has to share part of the cost for maintaining this force. It's called SMA. Talks about sharing money. It's always stressful when the US wants South Korea to pay more. While Korea, they are trying to reduce the financial burden on the US. From the 1960s to the 1980s, there has been a movement protesting the presence of US troops in South Korea. And that movement just kept blooming. Some people, especially students and the official world, that the US interferes too much in South Korean politics. At that time, South Korea is under the rule of authoritarian regimes. Military, and many people think the United States supports these governments to keep Korea in its orbit. In one, against the forces from the north. Protests against American soldiers. It happens often. In Seoul and other major cities. Especially in cases. Accident involving US soldiers. Damage to the Korean people. Over time, when Korea gets rich, and their armies are increasingly modern, many people think that South Korea no longer needs to rely too much on the US. Some people believe that South Korea is capable of my own self-defense. Reduce the presence of the US military. Avoid dependence on an outside power. It's true that poor people think differently. And when you're rich, you think differently. So even though there's been a lot of negotiations, the presence of American soldiers in South Korea, but with the tension still unresolved, especially North Korea's nuclear development, the US withdrawal is unlikely to happen anytime soon. Out. Strategic alliance between the United States and South Korea. It's still being consolidated. Make sure both parties have common interests in maintaining regional security and stability. It's the result of a whole historical story. War is a long-term strategy to protect South Korea from the threat of North Korea, while maintaining the balance of power in the region. Northeast Asia is a very sensitive region. Thanks for your interest. Follow this story. This is Explore the World channel. If you find this video interesting, please leave one like and one subscribe, and turn on notification bell to watch the latest videos. See you again.